The ancient witness is from 1 Samuel 3, verses 1 to 10. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord under Eli. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread. At that time, Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim so that he could not see, was lying down in his room. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord where the ark was. Then the Lord called, "Samuel, Samuel." And he said, "Here I am," and ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call. Lie down again." So he went and lay down. The Lord called again, "Samuel." Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call, my son. Lie down again." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. The Lord called Samuel again a third time, and he got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." Then Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, "Go lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Now the Lord came and stood there calling as before, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel said, "Speak, for your servant is listening." Then the Lord said to Samuel, "See, I am about to do something in Israel that will make both ears of anyone who hears of it tingle. On that day, I will fulfill against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house from beginning to end. For I have told him that I am about to punish his house forever for the iniquity that he knew, because his sons were blaspheming God, and he did not restrain them. Therefore, I swear to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be expiated by sacrifice or offering forever." Samuel lay there until morning. Then he opened the doors of the house of the Lord. Samuel was afraid to tell the vision to Eli. But Eli called Samuel and said, "Samuel, my son?" He said, "Here I am." Eli said, "What was it that he told you? Do not hide it from me. May God do so to you, and more also, if you hide anything from me of all that he told you." So Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from him. Then he said, "It is the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him." As Samuel grew up, the Lord was with him and let none of his words fall to the ground. And all Israel from Dan to Beersheba knew that Samuel was a trustworthy prophet of the Lord. The Lord continued to appear at Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel at Shiloh by the word of the Lord.
This is a great story. Like a lot of biblical stories are great. Rich. We don't really know from this story the age of the young Samuel might have been when he heard the divine voice come to him at night. But we might guess maybe 11, 12. I only say that because it's around this age, I think, that spiritual awakenings often stir in human beings. There is no rule for this, but it's certainly that time of life of great change. It's puberty time. It's time of many things changing, both physically and spiritually in our lives. In many churches, Presbyterian church upbringing in my case, the youth at this age would be invited to join the church. We'd attend for a period of several months what we called membership class. Some other faith traditions might call it confirmation or first communion, or in Jewish traditions, bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah. If you are a youth in a more tribal society, you might go through trials and teachings of a vision quest. There are many ways, all common to fostering spiritual growth, that communities, be they faith communities or other kinds of communities, practice to foster and nurture youth toward discerning and hearing God's claim on their lives. Now, having paid attention mostly to many childhood Sunday school lessons, when it came my time to partake of membership class, when I was around 11 or so, I remember these stories of direct and divine communication between God and people. God speaking to Adam and Eve. God speaking to Moses. God, or Gabriel, in this case, the divine voice speaking to Mary. The divine voice heard by Jesus as John was baptizing him in the Jordan River. So I remember asking our pastor at one of these class sessions, how does one hear the voice of God? How does God speak? Thinking somewhat literally still. And the interesting thing is, I remember the question, but I really don't remember much what Pastor Nogler's answer was. All I remember was feeling somewhat dissatisfied with what seemed like a mishmash of words wrapped in ambiguity. I'm sure Pastor Nogler's explanation was fine. And now, myself being a pastor, I too maybe would have given a similar ambiguous answer. Although, having thought about this, and having had the privilege of pastoring a number of summer youth camps, I'm pretty sure I would spend a lot more time with that question. In fact, within the camp context, I do spend time with that question. I use this story as a jumping off place for that concern. How does God speak? That, of course, is the UCC motto, right? Or one of them. God is still speaking. Now, we believe that, right? Not a mere rhetorical question. We believe that. Yes. Yeah? Amen? Okay. To various degrees. Hopefully. Hopefully we believe that. We're just humble about it. One of the many things I try to get across to youth at summer camps is to try and inoculate them from fundamentalist manipulations. One of the greatest manipulations I warn them is to be very suspicious of someone who starts conversations with the sentence, God told me. Not, I think God is telling me. Not, I have a sense that God is nudging me in some direction. Those qualifiers make someone's profession of God's communication much more legit in my mind. But to say definitively, God told me, that pretty much ends the conversation, let alone discernment. I tell the youth, yes, God speaks. And God speaks specifically and uniquely to each and every person. And it's important to be attentive to that. It's important to cultivate the art of divine human conversation through prayer and meditation and study. And it's really critical to discern, with the help of others, whether indeed the voice one is hearing is from God. I tell them to especially be concerned if a pastor starts to speak that way. I've heard a few TV pastors or TV pastor wannabes start out a sermon with the phrase, I just received a fresh word from the Lord. Quick, run in the other direction. If a preacher starts out a sermon that way, I tell them, he or she is messing with you. Now, maybe unintentionally, but nonetheless, it's somewhat dangerous. It was a short time after my membership class, around the age of 11 or 12. I remember lying in bed in a dark room. I remember reciting a prayer in my head before falling asleep. And no, it wasn't about if I die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. But I remember the subtle but real feeling that I was actually being heard. Some divine presence was listening. I was not alone. And then, of course, we second guess ourselves. Was that just me? Was that just my ego? Was it God? I'm going to say it's God. A few years later, God again spoke to me through my more fundamentalist friends, who informed me that faith was a personal decision and one in which one had to say a particular prayer and invite Jesus into their heart. Now, I just said that I warned people against certain fundamentalist leadings, and yet I feel that God used my fundamentalist friends to bring me to a place in my spiritual life that I needed to go. A place where spirituality becomes personal, not just something you receive from the institution of which you are a part. And then the invitation, of course, is to go beyond that. To go beyond the simplistic faith and move toward the complex and infinitely more interesting stages of faith that, and I hope for you too, we travel as we experience more and more of life's mysteries and beauty. I remember during this intense, devout, and pious phase of my spiritual growth, my mom was concerned for me. I remember her saying to me, "I hope you don't get carried away by this." To which I responded, "I just might." I'm sure that put her mind to ease. As it is, I turned out all right. My parents worry about their kids. Most parents worry about their kids doing drugs. My mom worried about her son doing too much God. But let's talk for a moment about Samuel. The story tells us that Samuel was essentially given over to the temple as a small child by his mother, Hannah. It was her way of dedicating her firstborn to God. Quite a sacrifice, considering that she wasn't even supposed to be able to conceive. So Samuel is raised up in the temple at Shiloh under the tutelage of the old priest Eli. And as the story informs us, the times weren't good. The institution was failing due to poor leadership. Eli's sons, who were supposed to carry on the spiritual work of the temple, symbol of the whole community's collective spirituality, but instead Eli has allowed them to be lazy, corrupt, and sexually exploitive. This is a sure sign of institutional and social decay. Now, just to be fair to Eli and everyone else who's been charged with raising children, there is not necessarily a direct correlation to how we parent and how our kids choose to live their lives. But in the case of Eli, the story indicates that he was somewhat burnt out personally, tired, defeated, and really not doing a good job of passing the torch on to his sons. The text tells us that the voice of God was seldom heard. And why would that be? Why would God stop speaking? Well, maybe it's not God that has stopped speaking, but rather it's we who have stopped listening. Communication, as we know, is a two-way street. There can be no relationship, whether it's of a divine nature or a human one, such as marriage or friendship, without the communication going both ways. There has to be listening and there has to be speaking. And for us, sometimes the listening is the hardest part. And the symbolic parts, these symbiotic parts of listening and speaking can't happen at the same time. We're either listening or we are speaking, but we cannot do both at the same time. You know the old philosophical question, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody is around to hear it, was there a sound? The same might be true, perhaps, of hearing the voice of God. If God is speaking and no one is listening, is there really a voice? Is there really a relationship? If you don't have a two-way street of listening and hearing, is not this the essence of what we call prayer and contemplation? And just to give my personal answer to that question, I would say yes, God has never stopped speaking, but we fail to listen. So let's notice a couple of other interesting things about this story. 4 times the divine voice speaks to Samuel. 3 times Samuel goes to Eli's room, wakes him up, because Samuel is assuming it's Eli who is calling. And finally, Eli gets a clue, realizes that something special is going on, and he tells Samuel, next time the voice awakens you, say, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. Now, here's the thing about faith development. When we're growing up and are still children, we generally don't differentiate the divine authoritative voice from the voice of our church or our national narratives, or more importantly, perhaps our parents. And so this is really an interesting thing in this story, because 3 times Samuel hears the voice and assumes it's the voice of the authoritative figure, Eli. It's only after the 3rd time, and with the discernment of Eli, that Samuel is directed to hear the voice as God's voice uniquely calling out to him. Calling Samuel to his life's work, serious work, hard work, adult work, work that makes a big difference, work or calling that comes about with the help of spiritual mentoring and spiritual rituals of initiation. Again, this is the task of the adults in the room, to nurture the young toward discerning and naming God's claim on their lives. Here, the voice of our upbringing is replaced by the very unique and relenting voice of the divine call, which each and every human being receives. Notice how the divine voice keeps coming back. In other words, God keeps speaking until we are ready to hear and receive. And as a part of this process of divine call, we need others, like Eli, who nurture and help us discern. But in the end, the journey is always ours alone. It is a vision quest alone in the dark. Just as you are alone in the company of silence. It's just you in a dark place, surrounded by a presence that disturbs and comforts. Eli tells Samuel to go back to his room, and there, when the voice returns, the conversation is purely and solely between Samuel and God and no one else. It's private. True for all of us. We need mentors and friends to guide and support us, but in the end, our conversations with God are intimate and private. Such moments are matters of intentional listening. Speak, Lord, your servant is listening. Harkens back to the foundation of ancient Israel. Hear, O Israel. Listen, O Israel. The Lord your God is one. Listening is the first act of faith. The task of the church, it seems to me, is to assist not just the young, but everyone to hear the voice of God. And here's the grid of discernment in my view. If the voice is one of life, it is a true voice. If the voice leads toward greater joy, hope, and love, it is a true voice. If the voice leads toward a path of authenticity, it's a true voice. It's the voice of God on some level. If, on the other hand, the voice is one of defeat, one of negativism, one of you are not worthy, you are not adequate, you have to prove yourself to earn love and respect, humanity is awful, you're awful, and so forth and so forth. These are the voices of the evil one, the devil, Satan, the accuser, the father of lies. Now, take the devil however works for you, literally or psychologically, it's still a voice of death and defeat, and not the voice of victory and resurrection. Finally, I want to point out that this story is one of page turning. Samuel represents a new way of being for the institution of both the temple and of the nation of Israel. It is Samuel who helps shepherd the nation of ancient Israel from a loose federation of tribes ruled by judges and moves it toward a more unified nation ruled by kings. A move that proves to be problematic, which is often the case when power is concentrated with presumably divinely appointed kings or queens at the top. But that's another story. The point is, we in the church, as well as in this nation, need to allow for the transfer of influence and power to be passed on to the next generation.